One, uh, oopsie. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back from lunch. And thank you again for joining us. For those that were yet to meet with me, my name is Nompilo Smanje, and I'm the Africa Advocates and Partnerships Lead at IPI. And in this room, we have a session on the weight of bearing witness, investigating war crimes and human rights abuses, where a panel here is going to share insights on what happens when journalists uncover war crimes and human rights abuses, and also addressing the ethical considerations and the role of the media in pursuing truth and justice. In other rooms, we have also other sessions ongoing, Congress Hall, on the revenue roadmap, and also Drina Hall, we have a film screening, how to build a truth engine. And then we also have another workshop ongoing in the Narrator Hall on how to operationalize mental health and well-being in the newsroom. So those are sessions ongoing. And for this room, Holiday Hall will proceed with the session on the weight of bearing witness, investigating war crimes and human rights abuse. And I'll hand over to Boro Kontich, who is the moderator.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for coming on our session. To reach this noble task, people from IPI put in front of us, we have a group of very respected journalists from all corners of the beautiful world around us. Give me some time just to say a few words about each of them. Next to me is Cape Diamond, journalist and human rights activist, advocate from Myanmar. Is a multimedia journalist, Emmy-nominated news producer, and award-winning documentary film producer. Cape is also Sakharov Fellow of the European Parliament and a human rights advocate. During a Rohingya genocide, Cape emerged as a major journalist who provided extensive coverage of human rights, crises, and conflicts in Myanmar for international media. Cape documentary productions were featured on ABC News, Al Jazeera, CBS, and others. He has provided contributions to two prominent documentaries, Myanmar Killing Fields, which won a BAFTA award, and Rohingya Exodus, which won a gold medal at the New York Film Festival. Next to Cape is Anastasia Stanko from Ukraine, from Kiev, journalist and TV presenter. I met Nastya 2 years ago in Croatia. We were in the same panel like today, and she was so offensive, good, and direct in that discussion. I'm expecting the same role today. You know, it will be excellent for especially for the public. In 2013, she's co-founder of the independent media channel Hromadske, which is registered as a non-governmental organization, where she currently is a member of the General Assembly. Since early days of the Maidan revolution, anti-government demonstration in late 2013, Nastasia has covered the protest in Kiev, streaming hours of video. In March 2014, Stanko was in Crimea, covering a so-called referendum and annexation of the peninsula. 2 months later, she became a war correspondent, reporting the conflict that began in Donbas area of Ukraine. In June 2014, she and her cameraman were taken hostage by the so-called Luhansk People Republic and held in a basement of a building in the Luhansk city. 2 days after, she was free, which you can see also. Next to Nastya is Hagai Matar, who finally came to Sarajevo. Actually, he came yesterday, and he was just 1 kilometer far away from a tarmac, and the pilot decided to return back to Vienna, but he came this morning from Frankfurt to Sarajevo just 2 hours ago. Hagai Matar is an award-winning Israeli journalist, political activist, and the executive director of the 972 magazine, an independent media outlet operating on the ground in Israel, Palestine, committed to resisting apartheid and the current war on Gaza and to promoting justice and equality. 972 magazine is the only shared Palestinian Israel outlet operating in the country. Hagar is also board member of the Journalist Union of Israel. And what Englishman said, the last but not least, Patricia Evangelista, as a trauma journalist and former investigative reporter for the Philippines news company Rappler. Probably you know that name because the lady who ran the Rappler, she got a Nobel Prize for peace. Together with the Russian guy, Dmitry Muratov, yeah, who is banned to work as a journalist now in Russia Today. Had a B book, Some People Need Killing, a memoir of murder in my country, an account of the Philippine drug war, was hailed as a journalist masterpiece. This is that book by the New Yorker and won the Helen Bernstein Book Award. The book, released October 2023 by Random House, was a New York Times top 10 best book of the year, a New Yorker and The Economist best book of the year, and was Time magazine #1 non-fiction book of the year. I mean, in our country, we can say you have to stand up, just, but don't need, okay, we're going to start. How we got this panel to talk about war crimes? And actually, one of the initial idea for this panel came 2 years ago when Media Center from Sarajevo, I'm running that institution, started with one project to make interviews with a journalist who decided to be witness in front of the Hague Tribunal. Probably Hague Tribunal is, everybody knows what we are talking, but not so many people know that almost 40 journalists all around the world, except America, except United States, testified before the International Criminal Tribunal for the ex-Yugoslavia in Hague in the cases of the war crimes committed in Yugoslavia in the 90s. Actually, it's not in the whole Yugoslavia that war crimes committed was in the 2 republics of now independent state, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. Why did you testify was our first question for all the people among some of the biggest journalistic stars, not only in Europe, all around the world, from Martin Bell, veteran of BBC, to Ed Vuljami, Guardian correspondent, and is it David Bowen? I saw him, he talked about Sarajevo and war and so on, and I saw him that he reported from Ukraine in the first years of the war, and also reported from Israel in the beginning of the war in Gaza. And now a question, why did you testify? In the Hague Tribunal, we've got different answers, but generally they said, we as a journalist were witnessed on different events, and why not to be witness in front of the Hague Tribunal? Only American journalists refused to appear as witnesses before the Hague Tribunal. What was the reason? They said, we don't want to give our journalist notebooks to the prosecutors, to the court. The other reason was in that case, we are jeopardizing our contacts. And the last reason, they think that if they started as a witness in a Hague tribunal, they will betray their profession and they will betray journalistic objectivity by testifying in the courtroom, whatever. All others were ready and was not so happy, but I mean, they started and they were a witness in front. Okay. I will start just with that same question for all of you. In a case, if some court, international or domestic, call you to testify about the things you found as a journalist or you made as a stories, did you testify? We'll start with the Cape here, near to me. And
Well, hello. Okay, for me, personally, I come from a country like Myanmar. We have a lot of problem, including war crimes and human rights abuses. Personally or professionally, I would say, yeah, I would testify. But for the stories that already been published, so regarding that, I can, testify. Yeah.
Nastya.
Yes, of course.
Of course, yes.
The Philippines is at the moment being investigated by the International Criminal Court for possible crimes against humanity. As to whether I'll testify, it's not a question I'm willing to answer in public. However, I wrote a book. It is a public record. The end notes are complete, so it can be used as they will.
Okay, now we are going to start again with the Patricia. The first question for all of them, just to say to all of us, which texts or story they made, they will never forget. That is what was the most challenging journalistic piece they made in their career regarding topic we are talking, it's war crimes and the human rights abuses.
How about I tell you a story instead? Let's start with a once upon a time, yeah? So once upon a time, there was a little girl named Lady Love. She was 11 years old and she was small for her age, all skinny brown legs and big dark eyes. Now, nobody called her Lady and everyone called her Love Love, but only her father called her Love, just Love. One night, late in the night, two men burst into the room where she slept with her mother and her father and her many little siblings. One of the gunmen, because they were gunmen wearing masks, stood over her father and then said, "Positive." Positive, he meant. Positive for being a suspect on a list of illegal drug use or dealing. So Love Love's father tried to sit up, but there was a baby asleep on his chest, so he fell back down again. Then he turned his head. He looked at Love Love and he said one word. He said love. And it was the last word he ever spoke before the bullet cracked through his right temple. So the baby wailed and Love Love's mother wept, but it was Love Love who thrust herself between the gunman and her mother. And it was Love Love who stood with the barrel of the gun just inches from her forehead. And it was Love Love, 11 years old, all skinny brown legs and big dark eyes, who swore at the gunman and demanded he shoot her instead. "Kill me," she said, "not my mom." So the gunmen left, but they weren't gone for long. When they came back, one of them stood in front of Love Love's mother, raised his gun arm, and said, "Duterte kami. We are Duterte." And then he emptied the magazine, and Love Love's mother died on her knees. When Rodrigo Duterte ran for the presidency in 2016, he told a story. He took every fear and every grievance, fueled by decades of failed expectations, and then he gave the enemy a name. He called it the scourge of illegal drugs. He said, if your neighbor's child is an addict, kill them yourselves. It will be a kindness to their parents. He said, if you don't believe him, I will feed you the drugs yourselves. Feed it to your children and watch them become monsters. He ran on a platform of death, and he was democratically elected. My people applauded, and thousands died. That's the story I've been telling for 7 years.
Okay.
I'll take a recent story that we published just a few weeks ago. It's a story from the war in Gaza. It was a story that 972, together with Local Call, broke recently, basically showing the quite unprecedented use of AIs to generate automatically kill lists of Palestinians in Gaza. Basically, as someone recently put it to me, with an algorithm not undifferent from the one Netflix uses to suggest content to you, basically choosing who to identify as Hamas members and therefore as legitimate targets. They have another AI that then finds the people and tells the army where to strike with no human supervision, almost at all. That story, based on sources from within the Israeli army, who were looking for someone to talk to and did not know anyone in the international media, and the local Israeli media is just not interested in these stories. They came to us and just shared in great detail how many thousands of people were killed because a machine said that they are Hamas, and nobody knows even how to backtrack, how to figure out how the machine reached that conclusion. So basically accepting the killing of thousands of people, and for each target accepting up to 20 casual damage in addition, and in some cases up to 300 people alongside that target. That is a story we recently broke, and it's one of the most terrifying stories I've ever seen, especially as this feels like this frontier of war crimes with the risks of AI, and where war might be going in the coming years.
Nastya.
Small context. Now I run the investigative agency in Ukraine from last year. I'm editor-in-chief, and our investigative agency before the war mostly was focused on anti-corruption investigation. But when the full-scale invasion started, we become journalists who are going to the front line, become war correspondent, and also investigating Russian war crimes. And one of our story, it was film which we published last year about two girls who were deported by Russia to Russian occupation territory from Kherson. It's a south part of Ukraine. They were 16 and 18 years old, and maybe you know that Russia deported near 20,000 Ukrainian children to Russia or to occupation territory of Ukraine, which occupied now by Russia Federation. And we were focused on this story, try to understand more how this process was going on, who helped Russians on that territory to move these children. And two girls helped us. We found them through social media, through their Instagram, and they decided to help us with the materials, made the video on their phones, and we understood that situation for them become worse and worse because they helped us with materials. And in one day we understood that we should maybe help them to escape because of us the situation for them become worse in that place where they stayed, where they kept them. And we saved these two girls, helped them to come back to Ukraine. And this was a big challenge for us, how to cover this story and how to be not only journalists, because we are journalists. We are not someone who try to help, to evacuate, to save people.
Thank you.
Well, sorry. So as I previously mentioned that, Myanmar is a country with war crimes ongoing daily basis. So I will share my recent, documentation of one of the war crimes in Myanmar. So it was a few months back. Make a trip to Myanmar Thai border, and so this is for the documentation of human rights abuses and war crime for an NGO. So I'm working with. So basically, so we went to that area. So we interviewed the victims. So so there was grandmom and her grandson. So the grandmom is like 70 years old, and the grandson is like 13 years old. So on 20th November 2023, so they were just sitting at their house like at night around 3 a.m. and the hunter aircraft bombed the village. So they were just sleeping, and then suddenly the grandmom, she feel like something is like warm under her, the under body part, and then like she realized that there was a bomb drop from the fighter jet, and then she was calling for help. So with the grandmom, the grandsons was also like hit. So and then they were sent to the hospital, which is at another village. So same day they went to the hospital. They were sent to the hospital. They had an operation. The grandmom had a upper angle ammunition, you call it, like the right one. And then the grandson, who was 13 years old, he had a book lead, like lower angle ammunition. So it happened like they had an operation around afternoon, 20th November, the same day. But then there was another airstrike on that village where the hospital is. So they experienced another airstrike in a different location, technically same day. So like they were kind of like experienced two airstrike in different area within 24 hours. So why I am sharing this story is, like Myanmar need, more attention. Myanmar has such kind of airstrikes and war crimes happenings every day. That's why.
Okay, thank you. Now, just go back to the project Media Center made about journalists from the world who were witness in an international criminal court for the ex-Yugoslavia. We ask them and give them hundreds of questions regarding war crimes reporting. And among all that questions, one was to talk about difference between objectivity and neutrality. And all journalists conclude that objectivity is a fact specific and that neutrality is something else. And BBC veteran Martin Bell said in our interview that talking about reporting from ex-Yugoslavia, mainly talking about reporting from Bosnia and Herzegovina during the war in the 90s, he said that you couldn't be neutral between the aggressor and the victim, between good and evil. And directly said, was I biased? Yes, I was biased. I was on the side of the victims. And let's finish this introduction with the words of the Elie Wiesel, Nobel Prize winner and the prisoner from Auschwitz. He said, neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. And that is a beginning of my questions to all of you. How you are dealing in your text with the objectivity, which is a part of normal journalism techniques and normal journalism ethics, and also with the neutrality in cases you mention, or maybe some other case? Do you see the difference, how you are dealing with all that details and the ethical dilemmas in front of every journalist, especially when he's faced with the war crimes and human rights abuses? Who is going to be the first? Looking because you are from Philippines.
Well, fuck. I don't believe there is objectiveness in journalism. I don't think it's feasible. The stories we choose, the way we tell our stories, are informed by who we are and where we come from. So my choice to cover a drug war story versus another story is already a judgment in itself. But I think neutrality is an interesting thing. I don't strive to be neutral either. I strive to be accurate. I strive to be balanced. I strive to be factual. But I come from a country that one day decided that the killing of its citizens was a wonderful thing. I've been a journalist for 15 years. I've covered massacres, I've covered conflicts, I've covered disasters, and the death tolls were way past the thousands. But the particularity of the drug war and the reason I talk about it in terms of neutrality is that I used to report about terrible things that happened because those things shouldn't have happened and shouldn't happen again. Then one day, the terrible became ordinary, and there was thundering applause. Rodrigo Duterte would step up to a podium and talk about 32 people killed by the police that morning in a 24-hour period in a single province. And he said, what a beautiful thing, and that more should die. That's the context where I'm coming from. That many of my people, many people I know, supported the war and supported the deaths of their fellow citizens. I'm not neutral. I do my job because thousands have died with the consent of many of my people, and I don't want to offer mine.
Yeah, can I add? I think that context is very important when we talk about some facts, for example, and my context is that I live in Kiev. Day to day, night to night, we are going to the basement in my apartment with my 3-year-old son. He come back to Kiev from my parents' house, which is on the west part of the country, which is more safety, because I want to be still journalist and want to do my job. And now he is in, I will say like this, in more dangerous place that he was in the beginning of war, because of I want to continue my job, to continue my work, and every day I think about it. My father-in-law was the soldier in the army, and now he has many problems with his health because he's 59 years old and I think too old for fighting, but the reality as it is. Now, what?
Can help in
Yeah,
some ways.
yes. Now I am sitting here and talking with you and my son in the kindergarten, and I know that right siren time to time is very loud, and my son also should go to some basement in his kindergarten, and he knows very well what is right siren is. And we have now a mobilization law, and my husband can be day to day also mobilized to the army, and my life will change again, and I understand this very well. And in all this, and when, for example, we have rockets at night for a couple of hours, I come to work and I understand that we should continue our work, and I am like head of the newsroom, and my journalist who also slept maybe for 2 hours somewhere in the basement this night should continue their work, and I should inspire them somehow. But only one thing what we want is like to sleep, to rest, or something like this. And of course, when we are talking about neutrality or something like this, it's very hard to be that neutral journalist when you are inside this war, when this war is a part of your life, very big part of your life. Yes, I'm not talking even about how I'm going to the front line. Yeah, and every day when I'm there, I think that maybe I will not come back to my son. Yeah, and this is maybe not right choice what I should do. And to be honest, sometimes I think I will say like this: we are in Ukraine, I think, very tired of this war, because it's sometimes it's not a choice, like to do something, not to do, because every day people are killed in Ukraine, and you just take your camera or something like this and go to talk with victims, And yeah, we are very tired of everything of this, and sometimes think I don't want nothing, and sometimes I feel that I feel nothing, not joy, not when my friends are killed, not even some sad or something like this, because it's so many emotions for these years. But why we continue? Because yeah, it's also a job, it's also stories. I know that every new death, it's a new death for their relatives, his or her relatives. It's new news. It's not that we know that this was already, we saw this already yesterday or before yesterday. And that's why we do this, I think. And about objectivity, I think when we're talking about the facts, because how many how Russia tried to say that facts no matter. And of course, when you try to be more and more objective and produce facts, it's hard to say that it's not true. It's not that was in reality.
Hagai, that topic about neutrality, objectivity is pretty hot today in Israel, Gaza, and so on, and also many people from all around the world talking about that. And we have a different opinions. Even we have a battles on a street in universities just about that two topics, how that's happening in the essence of the event in Israel, in Tel Aviv.
So I mean, to us, there's no question. We define ourselves as a media outlet that opposes apartheid, and we oppose the war. So there's no question. We don't presume neutrality or objectivity. These are just, we don't think of these as relevant terms. And very much like both my colleagues said, it's about being fact-based. It's about being fair. It's about being decent in the way that you do coverage. Some of what it means to be fair means, for example, focusing on the voices of Palestinian journalists in Gaza that don't get a voice. And this is since before the war, that nobody was paying attention and nobody was listening, and being a platform for those voices. And especially now when so many Palestinian journalists in Gaza are being targeted and killed, which is a good context to say that this evening they're receiving an award here at the IPI. So I really recommend everyone come, a collective award for Palestinian journalists in Gaza who deserve it. So uplifting those voices is something that's really essential, and I think is essential to journalism, not just for politics. It's essential to making sure that people that don't have voice are heard. At the same time, it means that while we spend most of the time, and 972 magazine has existed for 14 years now, and most of the time we report on Israeli war crimes, because those are the main war crimes that are being committed, it means also dealing with war crimes when Palestinians commit them. So when there's an October 7th and Palestinians massacre Israelis, we need to speak about that as well. And when there are hostages held and raped in Gaza, these are things we need to talk about as well. Not out of a commitment to balance, but out of commitment to human rights and international law and fairness.
But how your position is seen in Israel, in public opinion, for the other media, how they see that?
We are.
Are you traitors or are you heroes?
We are very much alone. The stories that we tell would quite often be picked up and re-reported by outlets such as CNN and BBC and Le Monde Diplomatique, and basically all over the world, such as the story I was telling you about before. But then they wouldn't be picked up locally. We would try to tell journalists in Israel, look, we broke this incredible story. It's, we're talking about it on Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, Sky, all these channels just standing in line to talk to us about it. Will you take it, like, to a local TV station? And they just don't want these stories. They're like, our audience doesn't care. Our audience doesn't want to hear these stories. And so we won't tell them. And by so doing, I think they're replicating the way that Israelis think, or mostly don't think, about the war crimes being committed. And they reaffirm that it's fine not to do that. And then when we try and challenge and kind of hold not just the government to account, but also the rest of the media to account, they're offended. And yes, sometimes they see us as traitors.
Cape.
Well, I have come through sorry, all the way, I was born under the previous regime. And then when I finished my high schools, it was a time when the country was open up. And then that's the time, the journalists, exiled journalists came back, they started reporting on so-called democracy era. And then we have a Rohingya genocide. So at the time I was reporting on the Rohingya genocide. So for me, I've always been looking for the 100% accuracy. Another one is like, I never want to be a mouthpiece of the oppressor. It's like, okay, so at the time, it was under the Aung San Suu Kyi government time, civilian government time. So at the same time, many of the local media in Myanmar, they were kind of like picking up what our government said and what the military said. Like for me personally and like professionally, I did not really do it, but I would say, being independent media, we always had to double check, if it is like the right one or if it is true. For an example, when there were thousands of Rohingya girls and women were raped, Aung San Suu Kyi, state councillor Facebook page came up with the Facebook post and announcement saying fake rape. That was the time my mind was blown up. Of course, in Myanmar, we all know who is villain, right? The military is villain, right? They are the one committing. But at the same time, at the time, the civilian government were supporting the act of villain, right? So I was very clear. At the time, these independent media, including me, like, people hate us so much. The general public, they hate us so much. They call us like traitors. Oh, you're working for the attention media, you are criticizing our government, you are criticizing our military because like you are a traitor, you receive a lot of foreign monies and stuff. I don't care. Well, somehow I really care, because I never tell people publicly that I'm a journalist. I never tell them. I never told them. I try to separate my life. But then turn out, when the coup happens in 2021, and then people started realizing that they were wrong, and then they started applauding and appreciated the journalists and stuff. Well, thanks so much for that. But and then again, I don't want to be praised again, because in Myanmar, if you are like praised, if you are like make us a hero or whatever, like you will be monitored. Like whatever you do is like mainly heavily watched. So I never want to be like that kind of level again. So professionally, I would say my priority is 100% accuracy, and not to be a mouthpiece of oppressor, especially the oppressors. Yeah.
Haggai, you mentioned other media, what they think, and that is a also interesting topic, that what we called here media solidarity, how the other media following especially stories about war crimes and other things. I told you that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's not the how to say, it's not a normal way that other media will follow media who open any kind of war crimes and so on. Probably they will be rather silent, not to say anything, And it means that who started with a very provocative topic and so on, mainly remain alone. What is the situation in your countries when you open that stories about war crimes or human rights abuses? What is the behavior of the other media? Do they follow you, or are they silent, or are they indifferent, or what's happening? Patricia.
Under no circumstances was I alone. The Philippine media stood up. We used to be the freest press in Southeast Asia. And in the aftermath of, during the drug war, it became more difficult to be reporters. While we were the freest press for quite a long time, the Philippines was considered one of the most dangerous countries in the world for the media. The death toll for journalists in the Philippines is very high. Even with that, and particularly perhaps with that awareness, everyone stood up. Well, not everyone. There were reporters who believed in Rodrigo Duterte, and there were institutions who, even if they did not, they were afraid. There were reasons to be afraid. Rappler, my own company where I used to work up until 2019, their license to operate was suspended. My Maria, our founder, was charged and convicted. And there are still many more charges. Other institutions lost their licenses to operate. It went across broadcast, print, and multimedia. The president once said that the fact that we were journalists was not a reason to be protected from assassination. I thought the fact I was human should protect me from assassination. But even with that, I worked the night shift. So it was, we called ourselves the night shift. It was a group of reporters, photographers, filmmakers from all over Metro Manila who covered the drug war. So it was body after body, following body after body, night after night. And the only reason we survived, is because we were all together. So institutionally, people supported each other, but as journalists, we did too. No one was left behind in the field. And it was dangerous, and both mentally and physically. But we did it together.
In Ukraine, okay, I understand that all Ukrainian media are the part of the same front and they are similar and so on and so on. But do you see any other voice in any Russian media, any which is near, or I'm talking stupidity?
It's important to mention that Ukraine is still a democracy, and for example, for us was also one big challenge to continue cover anti-corruption investigation against people in the government, in the office of the president, during the big war, when very big country with very big army fighting against us, and we understand that it's a question of survival, and we should all of us be together. But sometimes we see that people in the power still try to steal money when we fight with such a big enemy, and in one day we understood that we can't not investigate also these problems, and our colleagues from other Ukrainian medias also do this, and I think that it's also about bravery, but also a very big challenge to do this, how to do this, and very big responsibility, because we need this support from Western country with weapon, with money, and we understand that we should still be democracy, but also it's very important how to talk about all these investigation cases. But I feel support. Yes, about war crimes, I also feel support. We have some even competition between us. For example, when I was talking about this deportation of children, which is also one part of genocide, when children are deported to another country, learn another language, become citizen of other country also. and it was some competition between different journalists how to talk this story. But we have more than 132,000 now criminal cases about war crimes, and for all of us, we will have so much time to investigate all these cases. But about Russian journalists, I will say that we don't have, in general, some connection, even between us and Russian opposition journalists. And I will not say that we can talk about some support in each other or something like this.
Yeah. Hage, you mentioned a couple of things about other media, but would you like to add about this media solidarity and so on?
Yeah, I mean, there are very few Israeli journalists, mostly in Haaretz newspaper, that do excellent work, but it's very rare. We don't get enough of that. I also want to pay attention a little bit to international media, where I think we are seeing, like, as I said, people picking up our stories, people showing solidarity, people listening to Palestinian journalists. I feel the gap that still exists in the way that the international media treats this story, especially around the war, is the complicity of Western governments in what is happening in Gaza and in Israeli war crimes. So it's very easy to say, the Israeli army just did this, but to constantly remind who is arming Israel, who is funding, who is giving the diplomatic umbrella to allow this to happen, which are the governments of those other media outlets, is something that I think is really, really essential. And I think that's where I would want to see more effort of the international media.
Kate, do you have some examples that the other media in Myanmar trying to take down pressure from your shoulders when you open some topic?
Well, it is not happening anymore, I would say. Luckily, I'm very glad, I'm so happy about it. Well, when during the Rohingya crisis, like two journalists from Reuters, when they were investigating the genocide, they were arrested by the police, and they were charged. So at the time, some medias, they kind of like trying to make bad image of them. They were kind of like reporting in a way that these guys were investigating this because they've been receiving a lot of money. At the time, these two, they were my friends. So like even they were in a jail, whenever, we report about them, the majority of the people, they were kind of like, spreading hate speech against them, not only to them, but also to their media and to their family. But since I mentioned, when the coup happened, the general view of the public changed. They're giving support to us, they're giving kind of like hands to the journalists. At the same time, well, journalists in Myanmar, we always, most of us are always like united. If anything happen, even not related to the work, if anything happen, we are there to help each other. Now, most of the journalists are exiles in neighboring countries like Thailand. If there is anything happen to them regarding their work or regarding their status of livings in Thailand or anything, like we are showing our solidarity. So if anything happens, so we are there. So I'm glad, we have this good things out of the bad things happening in Myanmar.
Okay, now is the time for your questions. If anybody would like, there is somebody who is going to give you mic. Yes. This man in the third row.
Hello, this is Angel from Bulgarian Media Outlet. I have a question to Hagai Matar. It's about reaching out to the audience in Israel, because you said that it seems like a Sisyphean task to use a phrase also appearing in Israeli media these days about the war in Gaza. But I imagine that being alone means that also that only specific readers within Israel would be interested in, like, that your audience will involve only a specific section of people who disapprove of the war, maybe who want to seek the truth in a way that you don't see in other media outlets, maybe Harris that you mentioned, but How do you try to reach out to those beyond your bubble, if I may? Because I assume that the group that it self-identifies with what you write is not very big right now, especially given the fact that it's a war, it's after something terrible that happened on the 7th of October, and emotions run still very high.
Thanks for that question. It's something we're struggling with every day. Basically, I do want to say, while a lot of people that would come to our site, the Hebrew site that we publish is called Local Call. We co-publish it together with Just Vision, and a lot of people who come are from that very, very small camp of people who already resist the war, but not exclusively. And I can say, for example, when we publish a story like the one on AI, we got a lot of people coming in who are either from the intelligence community or former intelligence community, a lot of people who are in tech and are interested in this. And we try to find different ways to tell stories. Just the other day, we published a story about art in Gaza. We try to reach people in different ways. It's much, much, much harder right now with the way people are completely exclusively focused on October 7th and on the hostages. It's much harder than ever before, basically, to reach people. And yet, we are seeing new readers. We are seeing people that are convinced. And by doing smart work on social media and with distribution and trying to reach out and trying to even tell people, this is one place where you're going to hear stories from Gaza that you don't hear anywhere else. You don't have to agree with us. You don't have to agree with its positions. We're seeing that in our readers. We're getting emails from readers who are saying, we don't agree with your positions on the war, but you're the only ones telling these stories. You're the only window that we have to what Palestinians are experiencing and for them to share their stories in their own words, which is why we're coming. So it's not enough, I'm afraid, but it's something.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria. I'm from the European Correspondent. I wanted to ask you about your experience of collaborating with human rights organizations like Freedom House, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, etc. Very often, you are the ones who are documenting war crimes and transferring this information to them. And after a few weeks or months of investigation and verification, they are publishing these reports. In my experience, these reports are not always fair and just. They are also humans are trying to do their best. But I want to know, maybe from the insider view, what is your experience of working with them? Do you feel like they also have a bit more, balanced view of different conflicts around? I don't want to specify a specific one, but in general, and how careful they are dealing with the information and investigations that you provide to the war crimes. Thank you.
I will tell you a few words. Actually, we had a couple of scandals with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International in Ukraine because it's about this neutrality, how to say that Russian make some war crimes and like Ukrainian also make war crimes, but Ukrainian, for example, made like 2, and Russian made like 2,000 or something like this, and this is in one report. I didn't remember now the numbers, of course, but you can read about all this conflict, and because it was in the media in use, and now they in Ukraine, I will say like this, they don't have such influence, and their report don't have such influence as it was before the full-scale invasion. And the other thing that in Ukraine, people think that this big world organization, they can do nothing about our main, I will say like this, main war crimes. For example, I can talk about Olenivka. It's a prison camp in Donetsk region, which is under occupation territory in Donetsk region. And in 2022, more than 50 prisoners of war were killed in one of the camp in Olenivka. And there is investigation that Russia did this, but tried to blame Ukraine, of course, for this. It's Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed there. And we don't have still nobody from United Nations, Red Cross, not investigate this case for now, and they don't have access, and as we see, don't want to have this access because they say Russia don't give us access, and what can we do? We can do nothing about this. And that's why this is a question like what they can do and why we need this organization. And maybe you know that last year one of our human rights defender, Alexandra Matvichuk, received the Nobel Prize for Peace also. And she always says in her interview that I am, as a human rights defender, asked for weapon for Ukraine because human rights organization can do nothing for help people in captivity, for people in the occupation territories, because they are suffering. And when we're talking even about journalists, Ukrainian journalists who are in captivity, about two of them, for example, one is my ex colleague, we were working on the Hromadske together. We don't know nothing about what's happened with her for more than 1 year already. Nothing, just she missed somewhere on occupation territory, and that's all. For about another my colleague, we know only one thing, that he is in captivity as a combatant, but he never was a combatant. He never was someone who took the weapon or something like this. He was journalist. He was kidnapped by Russians in the first days of occupation near the Kiev, near the capital, and that's all. And this is also big crimes, and nobody can do nothing with released journalists, with release, for example, children back, our try to come back our children. And this is the big crisis of this international human rights organization, I would say like this.
Okay, now we are at the end of the panel. The other questions will be for the different areas in a hotel. Our colleagues are today and tomorrow and even Sunday morning. Thank you very much. Thank you for all our participants.
Thank you, everyone. So in this room, Holiday Hall, we have another session on climate and environmental journalism under fire. If you'd like to remain in this room, that's starting at 15:45 in the next 15 minutes. But also in the narrator hall, we have the demo training on VR risk assessment. And we also have an ongoing film screening in the Drina hall. So those are the sessions that we have ongoing. Thank you. Again, and welcome back. Others are still having coffee and catching up, but I think it's good that we can kickstart. So welcome to the session on climate journalism under fire, which is being moderated by Scott Griffin, who is IPI's Deputy Director. We have a film screening ongoing in Drina Hall and also other sessions in the other halls. And after this session also we'll then move to another venue for the award ceremony. So kindly join us also for that later on. But for now, please allow me to hand over to Scott, who's moderating this discussion.
Thank you, Nopilo, and thanks everyone for joining us for this session, which is a really important one about one of the biggest global crises that we face, which is the climate and environmental crisis. And I think that we don't really need to tell all of you that free, independent, and quality journalism is crucial to solving that crisis. In fact, we can't solve it without it. We need journalism to investigate the causes of the crisis, and we need it to help us understand the solutions. And without it, we are going into this crisis blind. And what we're going to be talking about today is actually the challenges and the hurdles that journalists who are doing this important work face. And IPI has been increasingly looking into this, assessing the challenges that journalists face around the world, covering climate and environment, which is a very risky and often dangerous beat for many journalists around the world. And I'm going to present in just a few minutes some of the findings that came out of a report that we published earlier this year with interviewing about 40 journalists around the world covering climate, just get a feel for how difficult this issue can be. But before I do so, I want to introduce our panelists today who are coming from around the world to speak about their experiences covering climate and the environment. And we also have one speaker joining us online. Buki, I hope you can hear us well.
Yes.
On Zoom. Yes. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Yes, I can hear everyone. Thank you.
Great. Just give me 1 second. So yeah, I'd like to introduce the panelists, starting with Buki Adebayo, who is coming to us, Thomson Reuters Foundation Context Newsroom. She's their West Africa correspondent. And she's a 2024 Rainforest Investigations Fellow at the Pulitzer Center. She's reported on climate change, health, gender, and environment and politics across several African countries for various media outlets, including CNN. And she's taught at the Harvard Division of Continuing Education and was a 2021 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. So Bukola, thanks very much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And closer afield, from here in Bosnia, we have Elena Basirovic, who is an investigative journalist focused on the energy transition and the environment. And she's the co-founder of Naratorium, which is a website focused on environmental reporting. She previously worked for Oslobođenje, which is one of the most important newspapers here in Bosnia, and the monthly magazine Dani. So Elena, thanks very much for joining us. In addition to that, we have Teresa Ribeiro, who is the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Teresa, thank you very much for being here as well.
My pleasure.
To my left, we have Özgür Gürbüz, who's coming to us from Turkey. He's been reporting on environmental, economic, and energy issues since 1994. He's worked for several major newspapers and magazines in Turkey and is currently a columnist with Bir Gün newspaper. So Özgür, thanks very much to you as well for joining us. Yes, of course. And finally, we have Santiago Saez from Covering Climate Now, CC Now. You previously were yourself a reporter on environmental issues in Spain, and now working for Covering Climate Now network. So thanks, Santiago, for joining us as well. So as mentioned, I'm actually going to break all of the rules that I told the moderators at the Congress. I'm going to give a short presentation with a slide. So can I ask you to please So I'll keep this short, but I want to give a little bit of, as I said, findings from a report that IPI published earlier this year, which was actually carried out by our previous executive director, Barbara Trianfi, And for this report, so it was Climate and Environmental Journalism Under Fire. It was the second report that we published about climate and environmental journalism. And this one specifically focuses on threats that climate and environmental journalists face. Okay. Shoot. Okay. The top sentence is cut off, but essentially it says that the report is the result of interviews with about 40 climate and environmental journalists in 21 countries across the world, so in the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And the report sort of laid bare the range of threats that climate and environmental journalists face. This includes the risk of physical attack. It includes the risk of arrest and detention, legal harassment, often in the forms of slaps or strategic lawsuits against public participation. We have online harassment, which is also a major issue, especially for journalists covering climate. Journalists also face restrictions on freedom of movement, so difficulties accessing areas where environmental destruction is taking place. For international journalists, difficulties reaching specific countries or getting visas for specific countries. And finally, challenges accessing publicly held information on climate and the environment. So I think it's, many of us in this room are familiar with the fact that many states adopt freedom of information laws and then don't implement them. So that's a major challenge for climate and environmental journalists who need data often to be able to do their jobs and explain the issues to the public. And the result of all of this that we found is that, and again, this isn't surprising, but it's that certain stories, which vary from region to region, effectively become off limits for journalists due to the dangers associated with covering them. And that ranges from illegal deforestation to different forms of mining that is environmentally harmful. And this obviously does a disservice to all of us who are trying to understand the environmental crisis and its impact. And the report also examines various strategies for countering these attacks and includes recommendations for states, for news outlets, for journalism support groups, and also for donor organizations that are supporting journalistic work. So the report also identified a number of risk factors for climate and environmental journalists. And one of the things that the report sort of states at the beginning is that, we found that the level of safety and freedom that environmental journalists enjoy or don't enjoy in general correlates with the overall level of press freedom in the country in question. So in countries where journalists in general face repression or retaliation for their work, environmental journalists also face that level of retaliation. And again, in a way that's not surprising because the issues that these journalists are covering are also issues that, other journalists, other watchdog journalists are looking into: corruption, abuse of power, this type of thing. And environmental journalists are also looking into those issues. But really what we found is that, journalists covering these issues, one of the risk factors, again, is that they're facing powerful vested interests. And this was sort of described in the report as a nexus, including companies that are profiting from environmental destruction, state officials who may often be corrupt and are also in some way profiting from this destruction, and in some cases organized crime, local organized crime, who may also be profiting from these activities taking place, and in many cases working in collusion with one another. So the bottom line is really that journalists on this beat are going up against some powerful interests who have a lot to lose from this type of investigative journalism taking place. So that is in a way the root in many cases of the danger that these journalists are facing. Another risk factor that we found is that environmental destruction is often takes place in remote locations, which are dangerous to access. So that in itself is already a risk, but also where the rule of law is weaker or in some cases non-existent. So if you think about journalists who are really out in the field in rural areas, covering, whatever it may be, tend to have less access to law enforcement. Law enforcement may not be reliable. They're more likely to be attacked. They're more likely to be attacked with impunity. They may also be running up against even local members of the local public who are not interested in coverage of industries that may also be in some ways a benefit to them. A third point is that many environmental reporters are local or freelance journalists who may lack the protection that larger news organizations can offer. So in many cases, they are really the ones shouldering the burden of telling environmental stories, which are often also local stories, and they don't, necessarily have safety protocols, risk assessment plans, or the ability of a large organization to get them out if they are in danger. Another point is that journalists covering environmental disasters and the climate crisis are often first responders. So if we think about, some type of natural disaster that takes place, journalists are rushing to the scene, and they may be facing risks for which they are not trained or equipped. Another point, and we'll come to this later in the panel, but obviously the polarization around climate issues, which generates a huge amount of hostility towards climate journalists, and that manifests often in online harassment, online abuse, smear campaigns targeting journalists on these issues. And finally, and this is again in a way not surprising, but it's impunity for attacks against climate and environmental journalists. So when authorities don't hold those responsible for these attacks to account, it sends a message that, this is in some way acceptable, that those who attack journalists, climate journalists, in order to silence them can get away with it, which in turn fuels further attacks. So this is just, a couple of recommendations. The report is quite long, and I'll provide a link to it after this, but just a couple of recommendations that emerged from this. So one is, obviously from the side of news organizations to really think about, developing and implementing risk assessments and safety protocols for journalists, for environmental journalists, and really understanding that this is a dangerous beat, that these journalists, this isn't about covering, it is very often about covering dangerous stories of corruption, for example, and this requires a serious approach to safety. And maybe I'll just jump to the third point, which is that, we also found that we need to create better networks and support structures, in particular, again, for freelancers or for local journalists, that they can rely on in an emergency. So those two are connected. We also, found that we really need to give more visibility to these attacks, also to deter potential aggressors, but really to speak about this issue more clearly and make a clear statement that the attacks on journalists, again, are not only attacks on climate journalists, are not only attacks on those specific journalists, but on everyone's right to information about the climate and environmental crisis. Obviously, the importance of ending impunity, the importance of ensuring the legal framework protects journalists, including so-called anti-SLAPP laws. And the report includes a couple of examples where these anti-SLAPP laws actually made a difference. Preventing vexatious lawsuits against climate journalists from coming to court. And sort of a corollary to that is ensuring that journalists on this beat have access to legal defense, they have access to pro bono legal representation, because again, journalists who are faced with the possibility of a life-ruining or career-ruining lawsuit, may think twice about publishing these really important stories. So that's just a couple of examples. And this is just a QR code link to the report, but it can be found on our website, Climate and Environmental Journalism Under Fire. So I just wanted to use that to set a little bit of the stage for our discussion today. But I want to get started now with the panelists. We're going to talk us through their experience. And I want to start with Buki from Nigeria. She's coming to us from very far away. So Buki, thanks again for being here. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your experience covering these issues. We talked a little bit, earlier this month about your specific experience, but if you could just share that and highlight some of the key challenges that you've been facing on this beat.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for that. And I hope I'm audible. I was just thinking as you were sharing this report on some of the challenges I'm actually facing right now and the challenges I faced in the past. Just setting out as a young cub reporter in a local newsroom in Nigeria. It's like the most read, the most known publication in Nigeria. But at that time, and that was like, I think 9 years ago, climate reporting or reporting about the environment generally was just not a priority for that particular newsroom, despite their visibility, their reach, and all that. And when I stumbled on a story, it was about sand mining and sand dredging right there on the Atlantic in Lagos, and how this was impacting communities around the coastal area, whereby powerful companies, UAE-based companies, were mining sand right there in the coastal areas in Lagos. And a lot of the houses in that community were collapsing in water, meaning as they took more sand, more houses were becoming precarious and houses were falling into water. There was great pollution, like the ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem in that area was just really, really polluted. And people living in the community were saying, they were mostly fishermen and women. And they were saying, we are not able to fish. We have to go further and further. The more they mine this mine in this particular area, the more we have to go in, the more money, the more risk to our lives, to our community, to our water sources. It was a whole couple of climate problem and environmental problems for people living in that community. But the government wasn't, at the time, nobody was really looking into this. Nobody was really speaking to them. And I wanted to work on this story. It was going to take some time because now they had been served with eviction notice. They had been protesting. They had been talking about the impact of this on their community. And it was just getting more and more embarrassing for the government. And they really wanted to cover this up. And I wanted to work on this story. It was going to take 6 months, but it was going to take that length of time visiting. I mean, this community was on top of water. I would have to take like really, really good speedboats to be able to reach it. I needed the buy-in of my editors. I needed to have time to be able to work on this story. I was covering health at the time, and my editor would wonder, why do you want to cover, what's the big deal about this story? And it was quite challenging because you had to do a lot of convincing. For them, it didn't look like this story was going to be on the cover of the newspaper or the home page. And even though I'd done a lot of investigations around health, around education, it just I wasn't getting the kind of traction I thought I was going to get. And the story had to be published for my editor to actually say, okay, you know what, I would convince my online manager for us to give the space that we need to publish and promote this story. It was really it was a first lesson and first opening for me. That was 9 years ago. And the interesting thing was that when that story was published, it was something that got so much attention. Even I was a local reporter, but international media organizations were reaching out to me. CNN reached out to me, BBC reached out to me, and they were asking me, oh, what are you seeing on the ground? We're seeing now that these communities are going to be evicted because they've been protesting and complaining about the pollution and also the impact on the infrastructure generally. And that was the first time that this community or coastal areas in Lagos, which are usually like slums, were getting that kind of attention. And more, I see that a lot of my colleagues, a lot of people that want to cover climate stories in Nigeria and probably the rest of part of the region that I cover in West Africa, it's usually having the support of your editors. And because there's no funding for this kind of investigation. They could fund you to travel to a particular community to go cover a story. But when it comes to environment and climate, it's quite, you feel a little bit of isolation. You don't really have as much guidance as you would think you would have on other beats, and it can be quite lonely, so to say. But I would say things are shifting, attitudes are shifting. And now I report for an international media, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, essentially Reuters. And we have sort of looked at environment as one of the pillars of reporting. And because of that, I did a recent story looking at pollution, oil pollution in Nigeria, in a community in Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the highest producers of oil and exporters of crude oil in Africa. And our revenue, the country's revenue is like 80% from oil. And because of the exploration of oil, we all know that that comes with also oil spills, pollution, and all that. And I followed the story of a community that for the past 30 years, a lot of oil infrastructure in that community has polluted their water, air pollution. They can't use their water. They've had a lot of fire incidents from just not being able to access this. There are pipelines running through their communities. They've been vulnerable to attacks. And when these attacks by oil vendors who want to steal oil from that community, and the community has been saying, you know what, you need to compensate us for the land that is polluted. You need to compensate us for all the monies that we spend buying water to bathe, to drink, or even cook. In the last 30 years, it's been back and forth with the government, and they've not gotten any traction. And to go into this story, for the first time, I think I was really, really concerned about the sort of legal challenge that could come from this. But I was able to do this because I had the buy-in of my editors who were like, okay, you know what, dot your I's, dot your T's, and the support of the Pulitzer Center, of course, who funded some of the reporting, again, depending on external funding for reporting on a very crucial climate and environmental story that was impacting, like 2 million people lived in these communities I was looking into. But the difference now was I was a little bit more concerned about how the Nigerian government was going to react to reports of prolonged pollution in a particular area, and they've not been compensated. Nobody was talking to them. And they also told me, the people living in the community told me, anytime we complain about this problem, the next thing that happens is somebody comes saying somebody comes from the agency to say, if you are complaining too much, we might as well evict you from this area. And going into that story, I was thinking, reporting it, is this something that's just going to cause more chaos, more problem for the community? Or is this a story that's lingered for 30 years that just needs to be told? And I was also concerned about the legal challenge and harassment that Reuters, for instance, or the foundation could face, because the government had said, you know what, these areas, we've addressed the pollution. They've always claimed to address the pollution, but the pollution was still ongoing, and we had to do laboratory tests to be able to quarterback our reporting. And that's also a lot of resources, because you have to pay for this. Again, you need the buy-in of editors, you need the support of organizations that are interested in climate reporting, that will provide sort of like legal guidance, or just support, knowing that if anything goes, if this report is published, it's going to eat some very strong interest, in this case, the government. Will I have the support of my editors, the support of my organization, and just all that going in your head while still trying to do what you really think is right in that situation. So really, that's really been my own experience reporting out of Nigeria. I've done a lot of reporting also on pollution, environmental issues out of Ghana. And every time you have to, is always concerns about the legal challenge from the government, or just wondering about your safety generally when the stories are published, and it gets the visibility that it deserves, really. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Buki. So I think it's fair to say that in your case, you don't see the authorities as an ally or a source of protection for your safety, or for the safety of other reporters working on this field.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't, because whatever you're looking into is probably because an agency or a government, in the case of the sand mining, it was the government that was given this big UAE companies license to do these operations. Of course, looking into it, you are trying to look into something that they obviously don't want you to talk about. Somebody has not done what they should do because they are profiting from this. It was the same thing with the oil pollution. The government was profiting. The government profits from oil. 80% of what is used to run hospitals, education, and all that infrastructure in Nigeria is from oil. The more you report about pollution, the climate ramification of this fossil fuel and oil infrastructure, the more it makes them look bad, right? So they really don't want you to look into that, and you're concerned Of course, that's not the main thing that you're looking at. You want to report this, but at the end of the day, you also need to look at your own safety. You need to look at your own, you being able to do your job and also being able to do it well. And yeah, those are some of the concerns I have. The government is definitely not your ally. They are not supplying you information. I know I had to stay on a particular report for more than a year because I was just reaching out and they just kept deflecting on responses and just saying, okay, you know what, we've closed this chapter. We don't want anyone to talk. Like, I had sources tell me from the government saying, anytime you send us emails asking about this, things get uncomfortable for us. And if I get that feedback, of course, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm wondering, is there something else going on in the background? And that's just really my experience reporting on environmental issues in the West Africa region generally.
Thanks, Book. And I think, that point again sort of just underscores this idea that environmental and climate journalists are poking at issues where there are a lot of vested interests at stake. And I think that some of those examples really illustrate that. Özgür, I'd like to turn to you and talk a little bit about Turkey, a country that has huge press freedom challenges, where censorship is a major issue in many different ways, where safety is an issue, legal harassment is an issue, access to information is an issue. So can you talk a little bit about, from your side, how these issues affect your ability and the ability of other journalists to cover climate, the energy transition, the environment? And I think you'll also tell us a little bit about a new climate law and how that will impact your work as well. Thank you.
Well, I think we have too many problems like many of you faces in your countries, like the lack of resources, the independent journalism, especially if you're working for an independent newspaper like I write to Birgün. So you do have not enough resources to go every places, and especially environmental journalism requires you to be there actually, because you want to be with the community who oppose to some business projects or something. But there is also the good side of it. Maybe I try to be optimistic this time. With the technology, then you can connect, talk to some people. So that helps. But still, of course, you wish to go there and then witness what's happening in the ground. So that doesn't happen. But I think these are the common problems in the world, everybody is facing. What is special about Turkey? The media is just so divided in Turkey. So I would roughly call that there are some statistics as well, 90% of the media is controlled by the government in Turkey. So what it means, okay, controlled by the government means it's not just if you have a story, the government company or institution is just doing something wrong, and then you want to make a news, then you probably have problem with the government. Oh, it doesn't mean that. It means more than that. Because we also have corporations. Some companies are very close to the government. So it's just so funny, there is a big power source. Either some of the company owners, they do own media sources. I used to work, many of them. So they own the media. Basically, if you're a journalist working in one of the big media companies in Turkey, newspapers or TV stations, probably you wouldn't be able to even mention the news that you want to make. The second thing is they also have, they're also connected. They have a good network. I think the government sits somewhere in the center. So they can even block you without owning the media that you're working. So you have many cases that if you're just trying to take a company close to the government, or maybe a friend of your media organization boss, then they will stop you, they will censor you. I have some stories, maybe I should tell one that's funny. I used to work for a newspaper, and then it was about to be sold to another guy, but while I was working, it was under the government control. Then I was sent to investigate a new coal power plant in the region. So I spent, I think, 3 days, talked to the villagers, had a good story because people were just against the coal power plant. I came back to Istanbul, and then I wanted to make the news. And then my editor-in-chief then asked me, oh, do you know which company is going to take the new coal power plant? I said, well, it's not yet known, but there will be a probably tender and etc. But he heard that the possible buyer of our media corporation will be the company. That's the possibility I'm talking about. Then he blocked the news. He censored, he didn't print it, just because of the possibility in the future, the owner could be the owner of this power plant. So these are the like censorship you face in Turkey. Then it forces you to do like self-censorship. Of course, that's another, I think, major issue. Then we have also some legal cases coming through. You could be now, I mean, not yet, but there's already like enough court cases on environmental journalism, like my friends, like especially ones like reporters working in the ground, police brutality, plus court cases, social media attacks, because there was like, the huge social media army. We call it troll, like maybe Tolkien heroes. Anyway, but like they attack you, like, if you really annoy the government or some companies. But on top of that, now there are two legal new things that's coming in Turkey. One of them is, let me see, because I don't want to forget, or I don't want to say it. Yeah, misleading information law. There is already in practice. So it's just like continuing. And then there is a government social media account as well. Like, it blames you of like, the points at you that you're misleading. If they don't like your news, you're likely to be misleading anyway. Then the new one, which is not yet enforced, but like it's in the penal code, like amendment to penal code, foreign influence agent amendment. So I think some of you are already familiar about this foreign agent thing. That's, I don't know, if you don't press hard, like, if you don't oppose hard, like it will come to Turkish life as well in Turkey. Then, I mean, I quote from Borders, Journalists Without Borders. They say research going against the security of the state or its internal or external political interest that can make you a foreign agent, basically, in Turkey. And the penalty of it like starts from 3 years to 7 years in prison. So that's the one thing. The funniest thing, I kept it as the last one, the climate law. I mean, you will think that the climate law shouldn't harm journalists, but it's so funny. There's also draft climate law, I should say. And one of the academician, Serkan Köybaşı, I quote from him, just look at the climate law. He's a professor at Bahçeşehir University. And he found one article, is Article 3, paragraph 5. It says the new law will oblige everyone in Turkey to support all actions to be taken in relation to climate change. Basically says that, like, if the government declares something that is in favor of climate, then you have to support it. So his interpretation is that if, for example, in Turkey, like government is doing, nuclear energy is climate friendly, then I won't be able to oppose the nuclear energy. I don't know the punishment of it, because it's not like in the penal code, of course, but this against another law. I daily actually oppose the nuclear energy, so probably I'll be daily taken to the court or something will happen to, not me, but any of us. So these are the like new issues. I mean, they're so clever to do that, like in the climate law. By the way, the climate law is basically, well, most of it, nothing. Just the carbon emission trading section is serious. But the rest is just like full of rubbish. But this article just like put it somewhere. So basically, with probably any company ask government, because as I said, like they have this kind of relationship. Oh, please put these efforts, as a climate friendly action, then you won't be able to really criticize or report on that. And this is, of course, first of all, like journalists concerned, but the foreign agent law also, like, I think concerns just the ordinary people using social media as well. I'll stop here.
Sure. Thank you, Özgür. I think a lot of very worrying developments in Turkey, but I think also what you described at the beginning, this sort of media capture, reflects a wider issue again in Turkey about the ways in which the media has come under the control of pro-government media owners, of the AKP party. And we see that doesn't just harm public interest information generally, it also harms climate and information on climate and the environment. So something we also mentioned in the IPI report. So thanks very much for sharing those thoughts. I want to turn now to Alena. I think we'd love to hear from you about what it's like to be an environmental reporter here in Bosnia. What are the issues that you face? And I mean, are they similar, different to what we've heard so far? We talked also earlier this month about what it's like, in particular, to be a female environmental reporter. You've got a number of threats, you and your team. So it'd be great if you could share that experience with us. Thank you.
Sorry for my voice. It was broken from yesterday. So if I stop, just excuse me. Yeah. Is it better? Okay. So yes, when you say I'm environmental journalist, I actually also mean that I cover crime and corruption in environment, which is like a specific thing. And actually, this is what got us in trouble. So basically, we founded Naratorium, me and 6 other colleagues 4 years ago, and one of them and I, a male colleague, and me, we were both from Breza, which is like small city near the Sarajevo, but it depends on coal mine. We were thinking about energy transition and what would it bring to this small city, which lives only out of the coal. So this was our starting point for the series of reporting articles on energy transition. So we started doing that, and pretty clear. It was pretty like early clear what are the main issues there, but also we had some surprising things that we discovered. Like for example, we discovered that there are no female in the energy. Energy is a male sector. That is the power. There is the electricity. So there is money and power, and all the sector belongs to a man. It didn't take long to understand it, and also you can see it by the access they have, like by the behavior that they had, like to me, like when you just compare it to the things that my male colleague, he was not experiencing the same things from the same people as me. That was pretty clear, like from the start. We finished this series of the reports, but unfortunately all the material that was recorded was stolen. So we only published stories, which is good enough, but we had a plan to make a documentary out of it. Still, the stories are great. And that is a long read, and we are covering all angles. Like we want to have like all city. We want to have like normal people, what they think about energy transition. Do they know anything about transition plans? So yeah, that's finished in maybe 2 years. We have been traveling from all over the Bosnia. Then after we published, nothing happened, and in some cases we were really lucky and happy that nobody wrote that, like read that report, because we were saying a lot in there, but it was not like, because it's a long read and nobody wants to see a long read. But we had, of course, really good feedbacks also. from the academy, from the people that we knew, and like organizations. After that, we started a cross-border project on wood in Bosnia with 3 colleagues from 2 from Holland and 1 from France. And that was really interesting. So we also we had a lot of cities that we wanted to that we pinned. It could have like crime and corruption in there. And we had some leads and we had some sources. One of those cities is Šipovo, which is in Republika Srpska, the entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, mainly Serb, mainly Serb and ethnic. So we have been there. Basically by the research we discovered that the mayor it has 4 sawmills, and in 2020 when the price of the wood was like 10 times higher than usual, only him got all the tenders and cutted all the wood, which was also paid by 12 other sawmill companies. But nobody could cut, only him. So he exported it, and I think we had some kind of a price which he get for that wood, but I cannot remember now. It doesn't even matter. So we published it. Among other stories, there was a few stories in that. Then he called my colleague. Of course, when we were investigating, we were trying to call him and ask him for his response on it. That is something that we always do, of course. He never answered. But then when the story was up, he called and he told to my colleague, please record this. He was luckily at his home. He put the recorder on, and the mayor, which is the wealthiest mayor in Bosnia and Herzegovina, telling him really nasty and awful things that I really do not want to say here. It's really rude and it's not an appropriate thing to do. It is so he calls me and says, okay, I have recorded this and the mayor asked me to publish it. What do we do? And I said, we have to publish. This is the only thing that can protect us. And that actually publishing the video was the only protection that we have.
So it worked. Publishing it helped,
yes,
you think?
Yes. I think that was the only thing that helped because nothing happened. This man, he assaulted some lately, maybe months ago, another colleague from Capital, from Banja Luka, and he has no consequences.
I think that's something that we discussed earlier about the fact that, because I was asking before whether the authorities provide any assistance to you when you are attacked, and I think the answer was a clear no.
No, nothing happened.
Yeah, which is again, I think a really obviously disturbing situation, and it relates to this larger issue of impunity that journalists who are investigating. And I think what you said actually at the very beginning is so important. When I said that you're an environmental reporter, and you said I'm an environmental reporter who covers crime and corruption, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about environmental reporters or climate journalists in many cases who are covering high level, or can also be local corruption, but dangerous stories. And so I think that was a really important point. And we see that authorities are often somehow linked to these cases or are not interested or whatever.
In my experience, until what I have from now, in almost every story, the authorities are the part of the crime. And every story that I have written, the authority is the one who does it.
That says it all, or it says a
Yeah,
lot.
yes.
And I think that that's a finding that I don't think is unique probably to Bosnia. I think we see that in other parts of the world, that the authorities are involved in these environmental crimes and have no interest in obviously then supporting the journalists uncovering them. Alena, thank you very much for sharing that. I want to jump now to Santiago, and you're going to talk to us about a slightly different issue, one that we face a lot, I think, in Europe and in North America in particular, but in other countries, online harassment is also an issue in Turkey. But journalists covering the climate become the target really of these sort of online harassment campaigns, online attacks and abuse. So talk to us about this phenomenon, what you see and what can be done about it.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to mention that although I'm in awe of the journalists that I'm sitting here with and that I'm seeing these days here, I would also like to uplift the experience of many journalists who are just at a job, who are not award-winning, who are not going to make into the history books, but their job is so important, and it's so important in climate coverage as well. And this is stuff for them as well. So it's not just covering dangerous stories or hard-hitting corruption stories, it's doing your everyday story. Now I would like to read to you. I'm not as discreet as my colleague here, and I'm going to read to you an email that we received last month. I'm really sorry for the language is a bit strong, but I hope you enjoy the nuances. The subject line is lying propagandists in jeopardy due to climate change alarmist agenda. Fuck every single one of you greeny sons and daughters of bitches for your blatant falsehoods, the unrelenting and ludicrous propaganda. It is my sincere prayer that the earth will open wide and swallow you all into a gigantic river of magma. Perhaps when the world is rid of you, elitist little communists, the entire earth will then thrive once more. You scavenging maggots, have a wonderful April in the Northern Hemisphere. The guy's a poet, obviously, and this is kind of funny because he uses like kind of this stuff, but this is really not a funny story. And I was thinking when I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking to talk about Don Phillips and other colleagues who have paid very, very strong prices. But then I thought about another guy who maybe you know it. He made the news last year, Chris Cloninger. He was a meteorologist at KCCI, which is a CBS affiliate in Des Moines, in Iowa, in the United States. And the guy is just doing the weather. Well, he just introduced climate change concept into the weather report, as we recommend lots of journalists all the time to do. Well, he got death threats, very serious death threats that actually pushed him out of his job and out of the state. He had to go back to Massachusetts, where he was originally from. He's not in communication anymore. He's now, I think, a scientific advisor for a company. These kind of journalists, who is like just some anonymous guy doing weather report in Des Moines, is, from my point of view, very, very important as well. In the report that we saw at the beginning, it says that 4 out of 10 climate journalists report having received harassment online. This data is actually consistent with what we see from our partners. What they report was we have more than 500 partners from all over the world, big ones, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, AFP, and really tiny ones like hyper-local media in Slovakia or Nepal. But this is something that we see across the board. People reporting this and people demanding resources and training in how to face this backlash. And I'm not saying only the kind of backlash that my colleagues here are facing because of the kind of stories they're reporting. I'm just talking generic, day after day after day after day, harassment of the kind that I was reading in this email, which, yeah, maybe hopefully, you're not gonna have your life threatened or your livelihood threatened, but this is also important and drives journalists out of the work. And thus the climate story is left untold. I don't know what the current methodologies at KCCI is talking is saying in his reports every day, but I'm guessing what he's not saying. And this is something that kind of like we have accepted as a profession. We have said, yeah, it comes with the job. You have to live with this. And it is true, it comes with the job. Because our job is now in social media. That's our workspace now, our office is social media. And these kind of attitudes and stuff happens there. So to a point, it does come with the job. But I really hate that expression because it kind of makes me feel like it's normalized, like we should accept it. It comes with the job, yeah, deal with it. But no, I disagree with that. And I have some more data and stuff. I don't know if you want me to go over that now or, yeah, sure. So we don't know often who are the individuals who are behind these harassment campaigns and their actual message. And sometimes they do. Like this email that I read to you, I didn't read the sender, but he signed. And I said he purposely is mostly males and is mostly conservative. They are in this we have a profile of who's the online harasser. This harassment includes personal attacks. Usually it's a mix of personal attacks, climate disinformation, character assassination, and veiled threats. Usually it's not direct threat. Sometimes it is, but often it's like veiled threats. I wish you would disappear from the face of the earth and so on. Sometimes it is more serious. Sometimes it crosses into real life, into the offline world. We know it's climate deniers because they often include climate denying propaganda in their messages, and this lets us pinpoint it quite a bit. This, first of all, is something very important, is that this is a very small minority of people. Even in the most conservative places that we work with, even in, I don't know, like West Virginia, like we work a lot with the United States. So even in West Virginia or in Dallas, Fort Worth County and so on, there's very little people that engage in this attitude. 15% of Americans at the moment deny climate change, or 19%, depending on, we have two studies, but around that range. That's the total of people who deny climate change. Not all of them engage in harassment. They are politically polarized often, but not exclusively, on the right side of the spectrum. This is backed by several studies. You have one from 2021 from Oxford and Leibniz universities. I have another one from last year from Yale University, and there's many more. I mean, you can easily find them in Google, but if you have curiosity, feel free to reach out to me and I'll send you those reports. And we know that these harassers are often stoked by cultural warfare rhetoric that is deliberately distributed by certain politicians, think tanks, lobbies, media outlets, influencers, etc., etc., etc. You know more or less in your region and in your country who I'm talking about. They are different in each places. So yeah, this is the kind of people that we're seeing. And I also have some good practices that we recommend journalists from all over the world and from all sorts of journalists, people who are heroes and people who are doing their job. And I think there's a few things that people can do. Yeah.
You share briefly?
Yeah. First of all, and I'm going to just talk to an imaginary person. Be prepared, because if you cover climate with any degree of seriousness, it's very likely that at some point somebody will reach out to you with some nasty words. Be prepared. But don't be scared. Most of the time, it's nothing. Most of the time, it's just an annoyance. But this annoyance can become really upsetting sometimes and really distressing. So you please take care of your mental health. When these things happen, First, document everything. Save all the emails, all the interactions in social media, save all the links, save screenshots, and save them online and offline. This is important, apart from all the security measures, digital security measures I'm not going to discuss here right now, but you should have. These should be stored because it could be useful in the future to document this in front of court in some cases, but also in front of your workplace. Second, remember, facts are on your side. You like not only facts, people. This is a small minority of people. They are very loud. They are nasty. They are aggressive, but they are few. Most people is on your side, even if it can feel very isolating and very overwhelming at some point. Third, you don't have to engage. Actually, don't engage. That's the best practice. First, because most of these people are not interested in facts. They're not interested in arguing or understanding. And second, because you're just gonna feed their algorithm. So it actually, you're gonna give them a lot of visibility. So we recommend to mute in social media if they're in social media, or send them to spam if they're in your email. You can also block them if you prefer. We don't recommend usually that you block them, because then you give them a bit more fodder for their campaigns. But if you feel more comfortable blocking them, that's fair enough.
One more, and then we can come back.
Sure. Yeah. And then talk to your manager and talk to your newsroom if you can trust them. I'll tell you later if you're a freelancer or if you cannot trust. There's other stuff that you can do, but talk to them often, especially in large media houses. There are resources that you may not be aware of that they can give you if you're in this situation.
Thank you very much. These are really helpful and useful tips, and I'm sure that you'll be able to share those with others. Santiago, thanks a lot. So I want to come last but not least to Teresa Rivero, the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Teresa, we've heard a lot here today about the threats and attacks that journalists covering this beat face, ranging from physical attacks to legal harassment to online harassment. And this is an interesting time because you and the other special rapporteurs on freedom of expression just published the joint declaration on the climate crisis and freedom of expression. So this is an important document. I was wondering if you could tell us, what is this declaration, and what are states' responsibilities to protect environmental journalists, firstly, and secondly, how will this joint declaration make a difference?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me in this very interesting discussion. First of all, I would like to say that the RFOM, the representative on freedom of the media, is an institution, an independent institution in a security organization, which is OSCE. I think it's important because one of the dimensions of the comprehensive security concept that is encompassing all the activities of the OSCE is precisely environment, and the other is also the human dimension, where media freedom is included. So I would say that the joint declaration this year allowed us to really combine these two dimensions that are key for security, and that are key to really approach the major global crisis we are facing right now, which is climate. Definitely, I would say that we have this big crisis, and we need to approach it, thank you very much also to my fellow panelists, because it was very interesting, all the dimensions you brought to this discussion. I also wanted to, underline the problem of security, because we know that climate change triggers lots of challenges regarding security, displaced people, forced migration, so many things, pollution. So So it's really big. And Santiago, I would like very much, because I think that if we want really to deal with this crisis, we need mobilization and scrutiny. And in both cases, journalists are really key, because raising awareness, it's no one as journalists can do it possibly in the most together with other stakeholders, science and governments in good faith, to really, mobilize people, to raise awareness, and to show how this climate crisis requires the efforts of all of us. And the second, I would say, it's scrutiny. And again, journalists are there to really ensure that scrutiny is taking place, and it's really contributing to solve this climate change crisis. Because of all these reasons, we decided this year, and also to align with the topic of this year World Press Freedom Day, which was about climate change and journalism and climate change. It was important that the 4 free speech mandate holders of the global system, which means it's UN representative on freedom of opinion, OSCE representative on freedom of the media, OAS organizations, special rapporteur of OAS, Organization of the American States, and also special rapporteur from African Union, that they look at climate change and freedom of expression. Every year, these 4 institutions, they choose a topic to, in a way, to set the scene and to set the agenda of an important topic with relevant implications on freedom of expression. And this year was climate and journalism, of course, and freedom of expression. And you were asking, what are the states supposed to do? Of course, I would say that they have 3 main responsibilities according to this joint declaration. The first one is protection. Protection of journalists is key. If we really want to have good reporting on climate, we need to ensure that they have the right protection to do so. And we know that in many cases, and it was very much described by my colleagues here today, that in many cases, all the business linked to climate change are concentrated in powerful companies in remote areas where scrutiny is difficult. So of course, and they are very, very, very powerful. So journalists need to be protected, and this is clear mentioned and referred and developed in this joint declaration. The second one is access to information. So states should adopt all the measures that really make access to information, which is crucial for the work of journalists, really a reality, and allow them to carry out their mission. And the third one is a kind of a proactive promotion of independent journalists and independent reporting, to create this kind of independent atmosphere for the journalists to be able to report on the issues of climate change in the best way. So, and we have heard that in many cases we witness media capture, we witness coordinated attacks against journalists, and you both spoke about this in your case with the gender-based dimension, which means that it's even worse. We also heard that there are quite a lot of this kind of abusive lawsuits against journalists that are investigating crimes against the environment. So we need to create this enabling environment for journalists, which means really to take all the measures to combat these coordinated attacks against journalists that are reporting on climate change. We need clear protection and to allow them to report without fearing having lawsuits that can completely destroy their career and their sources and the outlet, the media survival. So these are some of the measures that the states, according to this joint declaration, should adopt to really allow journalists to do their work of mobilization and scrutiny. Why are these joint declarations important? Because they, first of all, they are adopted by all the free speech mandate holders, and this is important, which means that they can set the agenda. At the same time, and this is an important reason also to look at this JDs as a contribution to the work of journalists is, of course, to set progressive standards in the field of freedom of expression. So it's advancing freedom of expression standards, and at the same time putting high in the political agenda topics this year like climate change. So this is the role of this JDs, and of course then it's when looking at a specific topic, identifying what are the challenges and what the different stakeholders, from states to online platforms to journalists themselves and other stakeholders like media outlets should adopt to really ensure that the important work or the important mobilization that is needed to tackle a crisis of like climate change can be materialized. So I would say that we have this multiple dimensional function of the joint declarations.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for sharing that. We're running low on time here, so we may not be able to field questions from the audience today. But I just want to close out maybe by coming back to our first three speakers, to Buki, to Özgür, and to Alena, just to ask you very brief last comment, if you can try to summarize, what would be sort of one key change, one thing that would need to happen to improve your ability to cover these topics, to cover climate and environment safely and freely? What would be at the top of your list? Buki, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, and thank you for those great insights. All the panelists have spoken. I think for me, and not just speaking for myself, also speaking for other climate journalists that we've met in different forums, is just to also sort of front and center climate reporting and environmental reporting in our daily coverage, and I mean in the newsroom. Again, and I always harp on this. I find out that whatever happens, if you have the support of your editors, also in shaping your story in a way that is interesting to everyone and it matters. I mean, I think the climate, not just crisis, we've seen a lot of reporting around heat waves in schools. Schools have had to shut down. There are gig workers, there are remote workers. There are a lot of workers that have been affected by this. It's a present concern, because when we talk about environment, climate, sometimes it could be like, oh, it's the big stories around corruption. It just could be the day-to-day stories that affect you and I, wherever we are or whatever region that we are. And I'm just saying, I think what will make my work easier and the work of my other colleagues covering climate, especially in Africa or the rest of it, is just for editors to sort of give more visibility to stories around climate. And that way it signals to stakeholders, industries, communities, sectors, and even the government, whoever, that this is a story that deserves that. These are stories that deserve attention and need to be looked into. And everyone, that's how you get everyone sort of aware and more committed to this sort of issues around climate and the environment. So for me, I would say more newsrooms need to dedicate more resources, support, and just encourage reporters and correspondents who increasingly want to cover this kind of stories.
Thank you, Buki. Özgür, what would be at the top of your list?
I mean, freedom of speech, I would say it will be the easy one, but maybe we need conceptual changes all around the world. I think I really struggle when people comes to us, oh, don't you want Turkey to grow? The economic growth, for example. But the economic growth, what they meant is just based on GDP. GDP is like kind of a lying machine. I mean, just a simple example, if I have a legal gun bought from the shop, paid all the VAT and everything and killed somebody here, then I will increase the GDP. So this is the figure, but we are all talking about this based on this figure. So I think we need a global change of how we describe the economy, how we are going to use the figures, what are the bases of our, the growth or development. I think we need to change that globally, because we cannot do it in one country. And that's the one thing. And that's the third thing, I think, it's about us, the environmental journalists. I mean, every journalist, to be honest, look like each other, but we are a bit different because sometimes, or most of the time, we are the voice of animals, plants, basically who don't speak the language of human. The threats we're facing, if the grass was able to speak, in human language, then the company, the grass says, oh, don't, to destroy me, the company maybe will go on grass and jump on it, the harassment will be on grass. But the journalists, environmental journalists, have to be the voice of the grass. So that's why we are just much more on a target, I feel. That, I mean, that doesn't, happen in every sort of journalism. So maybe this is also have to be understood very well, that we are corresponding, we are just acting behalf of the environment. So, but we really need just one more thing. We really need like global changes, because in Turkey, like we have problems about like getting the information data, especially like coal power plant data is just trade secret. I think under the either Paris Agreement or international negotiations, there could be also, change, and every country just like, the openly let journalists or environmentalists to get this data from the coal power plant. That could be internationally binding, kind of regulations as well. Thank you.
Good. And I'm going to give the last word to you, Elena. What would be on the top of your list?
I can get
Okay,
it.
sure.
But okay, I will try. I think it's a law enforcement. Like we need to start implementing those good laws that we have on freedom of expression. Here in Bosnia, we still have it. We have in Republika Srpska, this is not like, this is also threatened. But the laws that we have to use it, and we have to implement it. And I think the juristic system, this is what we need to have better, to feel safe here, or to feel more secure doing my job.
Thank you. I think it's an important message to end on. Santiago, I'll give you a very last word, very brief.
Very last. If for anyone who's interested in climate reporting, we are meeting tonight after the last session at from 8:30 so on until late at a place called Pivnica. I think I'm pronouncing it wrong. Yeah, Pivnica Sarajevo, which is a 10-minute walk from here. You should have it in one of the newsletters that these guys sent.
Yes, yes, please, Teresa. Yes.
Very much, a call like Santiago, because I would I recommend, this JD, the Joint Declaration. It's important to read it. Some time ago, we commissioned a study on the JDs that we produced for more than since more than 25 years. And the conclusion was that JDs constitute the most significant of non-binding standards on freedom of expression at the global level. So it's worth to look at. Many of the issues that were raised here are there, and it's also used in many in case submissions by Article 19 by Open Society Justice Initiative, Media Legal Defense Initiative, in East African Court of Justice, in the European Court of Human Rights. So really, JDs are important, and again, they set the standards of freedom of expression and certain topics, and important ones every year. So I think it's important to look at them, to use them. It's an important instrument of soft power.
I can absolutely underscore that. It's true. We use them in our work. They're a really important tool. So I think, and this year's declaration is especially important. I just want to underscore what Santiago said about the gathering this evening. If you're interested in covering climate and the environment, please do join this gathering this evening. If you have questions about where it's being held, please check with Santiago. We'd love to see you there. And lastly, I just want to thank all of you for being part of this panel. Buki, thank you for joining us from far away. Özgür, Elena, Santiago, Teresa, thank you so much for being here. This is such an important topic, and it was really important to have this here at the Congress. And lastly, I just want to give a reminder to everyone. So after this panel, we're all actually right now, we're all heading over to hopefully heading over to the awards ceremony for the IPI IMS World Press Freedom Hero and Free Media Pioneer Award, which is taking place at the building of the Bosnian Public Broadcasters. We have buses already waiting for us at the hotel entrance here. So if you could please make your way over there to be transported. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.